Ever heard of paying extra for every piece of paper you use? Well, the colonists sure hadn't, until the Stamp Act rolled in. This was 1765, and the British government had just passed a new rule that got everyone talking. Or should we say, complaining? Back then, Britain had just wrapped up a long, costly war against France, and they were out of money. So they looked across the ocean to their colonies in America and thought, hey, they use paper over there. Let's charge them for it. And that's exactly what they did. The British Parliament passed the Stamp Act, which meant that every piece of printed paper the colonists used, newspapers, playing cards, even legal documents, needed to have an official stamp on it. And that stamp? It cost money. Imagine having to pay just to use your notebook or play a game of cards with friends. Not cool, right? So what exactly was the Stamp Act? It was a tax law. But this wasn't just any tax. It was one that felt really unfair to the colonists because they had no say in it. Parliament in Britain had passed it without asking any of the American colonists if they agreed. No votes, no discussions, just one big rule that everyone had to follow. And the colonists? They were furious. They came up with a new motto, no taxation without representation. That's just a fancy way of saying, if we don't get a say, you don't get our pay. Colonists across America started speaking out. In fact, there were protests everywhere. Crowds filled the streets, people made speeches, and some folks even refused to buy British goods. Imagine turning down tea and fabric from Britain. That's how mad they were. In Massachusetts, a group called the Sons of Liberty was so outraged that they started organizing rallies to spread the word. They made sure everyone knew just how unfair this tax was. They even started burning images of British officials and making sure that tax collectors knew they weren't welcome. They'd say, "We don't want your stamps." And guess what? All that effort paid off. The protests, the rallies, and the refusal to pay finally got Britain's attention. Parliament saw how upset everyone was and realized the Stamp Act might have been a big mistake. In 1766, just 1 year after the tax was put in place, Parliament decided to cancel it. They repealed the Stamp Act, meaning it was no longer a law. But the Stamp Act left a lasting impact. The colonists realized something important. If they stood together, they could make a difference. And this was only the beginning. Soon, they would start uniting even more, getting ready for what would eventually lead to the American Revolution. So, next time you're writing on a piece of paper, playing cards, or reading something printed, remember the colonists who stood up and said, no taxation without representation. All because of a tax on stamps. Who knew a little stamp could lead to such a big change?